known as your weekly dose of solidarity. My name is Christina Whitlock. I am your host, your voice of experience, and anytime piano teacher friend. I am so grateful you're here today, so let's get to it. This is episode 236 of the Beyond Measure podcast. Earlier this fall, I published an episode on what's working for me in this season of life. I do those episodes every quarter or so, but the most recent was episode 232. In that episode, I mentioned one of my great successes of this season has been a 30-piece challenge that I am running with my students to celebrate my 30th year of piano teaching. I mentioned that, yes, my students are all working towards this goal of completing 30 pieces this fall, but I'm also adding a twist this time. To get their piece counted on their list, students must first present the piece as it was written by the composer, in an appropriate, consistent tempo with accurate notes. But then they have to show me their own creative modification of that piece. They can change the articulation, the rhythm, the mode, the meter, the style, the pedaling, the dynamics, the character, whatever they wish to do. They just have to present their own take on these pieces in order to get them on their 30-piece list. Well, after I published that episode, I received a lot of questions, and I wanted to answer them for you today here on the podcast. I want to begin with one quick note about incentive programs in general. I don't run a lot of these. They aren't generally my favorite thing. I do run my December performance challenge every December. That's been a popular one that many of you have jumped on. You can read all about that at christinawhitlock.com/December if you're curious. I also talked about a fun Thanksgiving activity here on the podcast last year, and I'm going to link those things in the show notes for today's episode. But the thing about incentive programs is this. If you are not excited about them, no one else will be. So don't get caught up in comparing your studio to other studios. You do not have to run challenges and elaborate practice incentives. They can be great, and some teachers love them. But experience has taught me that if the teacher isn't excited, no one else will be. And a challenge that never gets any momentum because nobody's really excited about it, well, that's just sad. Everyone can feel this collective ugh, and we're certainly not looking to add any more of that to the piano experience, right? So let's talk specifically about 30-piece challenges. First and foremost, I credit the idea of these challenges to Elisa Milne. Elisa Milne is this fabulous composer, teacher, writer, speaker, pianist, all the things. And I'm pretty sure Elisa started talking about this like almost a decade ago. I'm not sure exactly, but Elisa coined this term, repertoire-rich teaching. Namely through what began as her 40-piece challenge. Now, if you know anything about my approach to teaching, you know that I can thoroughly get behind a repertoire-rich approach. My students spend exponentially more time in supplemental collections than they do in method series. It's not that they don't have a method book in the mix, but it is not the bulk of their musical diet. Exploring the depths of the piano repertoire are what keep me excited about teaching, as well as allowing me to outfit students in just the right repertoire. So this idea of encouraging students to complete a certain number of pieces within a certain amount of time has a lot of merit. And I'm grateful to Elisa Milne for shining the spotlight on this kind of challenge. I should also give Wendy Stevens of ComposeCreate.com fame some credit here. She built on Elisa's legacy here, and she's been publishing these free challenge tracking charts on ComposeCreate.com for many years now. She's always thoughtful about the year's color schemes and provides you with a tracking chart for students in their binders, as well as a template for a giant chart you can hang on your wall. I typically like to design my own things, but I will have to admit, I was thrilled when I realized this year's challenge charts matched my studio colors exactly. I downloaded Wendy's challenge tracker so fast and saved all kinds of time. I will link that resource in the show notes for today as well. So, the first listener question we're answering is about quantity. I've received a lot of questions like, should I choose 30 or 40 pieces? Or how long should I give my students to complete this challenge? It's important to note there is no magic in the number 30 or the number 40. Elisa has said that she originally settled on 40 because that translated roughly to 1 piece per week throughout the academic year. But listen, every studio is different. We all have different studio cultures, we teach different repertoire, we use different resources, and we work to varying degrees of detail. So when it comes to how many pieces you should choose for your studio, those are not questions I can answer for you. You are going to need to think about the unique makeup of your own studio, and you're going to need to come up with a plan that suits you. The one thing I will say about quantities and timelines is this. Remember, challenges are only going to be motivating if they are attainable. If this is your first repertoire challenge, I would strongly recommend aiming for fewer pieces and a longer timeline, or no timeline at all. You don't want to establish a challenge that most of your students won't be able to meet. That would be really depressing. So think about the season you are in, what other demands are going to be put on your students' time, all the things. There is no magic in the number of pieces you choose or the timeline you select. Again, all of our studio cultures are different. Now, as for me, in the past, I've often run what I call the Fall 40, which is a 40-piece challenge set to be completed between August and December. Now, obviously, that's a tighter timeline than some others, but depending on your students and the types of pieces you allow to count, it can be doable. This year, I'm celebrating 30 years of teaching, so we're aiming for 30 pieces. It just worked out that way. I'd originally announced this as a challenge to be completed by the end of 2025, so students would have through December to finish it. And most of my students are on track to do just that, especially because the Christmas season is coming and it's pretty easy to crank out a ton of holiday carols. And yet, I have a good amount of busy high schoolers this year, and it's become clear that some are really far behind. Now, again, this is not supposed to be something that discourages my students or that gives parents something else to battle about at home. That is the exact opposite of the point. So I have shifted gears a little bit, and I'm simply celebrating students as they complete their 30 pieces all year long. Easy. I did tell students maybe those who complete their challenges by January could earn some additional bragging rights over the others, and I think that's fair, and in many cases, pretty motivating. For what it's worth, I think the time of year has a lot of impact on these challenges. My personal approach to my studio calendar is that we do not do any kind of performing in the fall semester. We load up on repertoire and concepts and explorations through the fall. So then, when the spring semester hits and we're spending a lot more time preparing for festivals and competitions and recitals, that we've been able to have one season that's a little more generalized instruction and another that is highly focused on detail. There are occasions where I deviate from that plan, like last year when I hosted a November recital in a planetarium, but I am generally happiest when I stick with a low-key fall and a specialized spring. So, all that to say, I can't tell you how many pieces your challenge should be or how long you should give students to complete it. Sorry about that. Aim small to start and then see where you can go from there. So, the next question we'll tackle is about prizes, as in, what should teachers offer as a prize for completing this challenge? In general, surprisingly maybe, I am not a big fan of prizes. I think you can play up completing this challenge as its own reward. Even promising to announce the names of students who have completed 30 pieces at the next studio recital, that can be really motivating. A lot of teachers offer candy bars or small gift cards. You can try to partner with a local business to see if they will offer some kind of discount or reward for students who complete the challenge. But either way, I don't think teachers need to get hung up on prizes for a repertoire challenge. The challenge really is its own reward. We explore all of these wonderful pieces. We get experience, we grow in confidence and fluency and all the things. So just think about that as you consider. The next listener question, it's a big one. How do my students get this much music to play? Am I loaning out books? Are they purchasing more books? What's the deal? For me, and again, this is for me, getting more repertoire in my students' hands is never an issue. There are a few things that allow me to be able to say that. First of all, I collect a registration and materials fee every August. Families pay a flat fee at the start of the year, and that gives me a nice reserve of money to use for music purchases all year long. That means I can capitalize on sales, I can buy in bulk, and I can keep my favorite resources stocked in my studio so I don't have to wait for books to get shipped to me when I need them. It's just a lifesaver in many ways. One of the strengths of that system is the fact that I never have to worry about asking parents if they're okay purchasing another book. I remember early in my teaching career how there were always a handful of families who seemed reluctant to purchase new materials, and I always dreaded those conversations. So, all this to say, I have a very impressive stash of music books in my studio to lend out or to give to students. So, when it comes to things like a 30 or 40 piece challenge, I can lend books out initially. And if my students decide that they like them and they want to play out of them in the future, then they can keep them. It's really that simple. If not, they give them back and I hold on to them for the next student need. I also have a ton of digital studio licensed music, and that collection is very valuable for these challenges. We'll talk more about that in a moment. That feels like a good transition to our next question today, which is, are students allowed to count pieces below their level? Once again, I'll remind you that the rules are up to you. So ultimately, you decide this for yourself. However, I feel very strongly that students benefit from playing pieces below their current level of study. One of the big mindset shifts I would love to see in our profession is to stop the piano student conveyor belt of always having to play harder and harder and harder pieces. There is much to be learned by moving laterally and swimming around in concepts for longer periods of time. I do not want to keep perpetuating this idea that music is inherently better just because it's more challenging. No way. Of course, we do want our students to progress over time, and they will, but I am just more interested in their enjoyment of music along the way, rather than judging their merits on what color of cover is on their book. And these 30, 40-piece challenges are terrific for that very thing. Certainly, you're going to have to set boundaries. Like, my intermediate students can't expect to come in and play through the Piano Adventures Book 1 and call it a day. If they want to use a collection that I have not specifically assigned them for the challenge, all they have to do is ask, and I will determine on a case-by-case basis if it's going to count. It's that easy. Next question, what resources do I use for this challenge? Ooh, it's a good one. Buckle up. So again, I already mentioned Wendy Stevens and her challenge tracker that she gives away on composecreate.com. She has versions for 30 and for 40-piece challenges, and those are great. Do not skip the wall chart, my friends. You will be amazed at how motivating it is for students to see their studio mates' names on display, along with how many pieces they have completed. That's peer pressure at its finest, as far as I'm concerned. And again, you are in control. So if you have a student who is falling behind, give them a boost with some smaller pieces. Whatever you need to do to get the ball rolling. As far as actual music is concerned, the world is your oyster. I will give a shout out to a few of my favorites though. And by the way, none of these composers or publishers are even aware that I'm doing this episode. So these are legit recommendations with no behind the scenes favors involved. I will post links to these today in the show notes for this episode. Since I was just talking about Wendy Stevens, let me say that she has a series of pieces on composecreate.com called Short Sheets. These are single-page pieces at a wide variety of levels, and they come in packages of 3. All 3 short sheets in a set focus on one common technical element. So, for example, there's a late elementary collection called Night Adventures, and they all feature left-hand melodies. Since I own the studio license, I was able to print 1 million copies of those 3 sheets for everyone who could play them, and I passed them all out last month. Those are perfect Halloween pieces that aren't actually about Halloween, so they're technically seasonless, but they are also extra great in October, whether students celebrate Halloween or not. So Wendy Stevens' short sheets are a go-to for me to pump up more repertoire in my students' assignments. While I'm singing the praises of digital licenses, I will also shout out a wonderful Canadian composer by the name of Lynette Sawatsky. Lynette has a terrific group of compositions on her website, and I especially love her pieces from Waddle and Quack, Shimmer and Strut, and Flutter and Blink. Shout out to Beyond Measure super friend Laura Gray for introducing me to Lynette Sawatsky last year in a session of Teachers Teaching Teachers. Side note, if you are not part of the Super Friends community, you are definitely missing out. Moving on, Juan Cabeza has 3 books that are absolute staples of my repertoire challenges. He has 2 books of diversions, along with Piano Train Trips. And those books are favorites of my students anytime. And it always seems like when I run these challenges, it's inevitable that many spaces on their trackers will be taken up with his titles. They lend themselves so beautifully to creative modifications that they've been an especially great fit for this year's challenge. For elementary students who need a boost, I love Kevin Olson's Perfect Start series. Those are short pieces which work well for my newest readers. Willis Publishing has been doing some really exciting work lately, publishing complete collections of composers like Gillock. You can buy the entire collection of Accent on Gillock, or also the entire collection of his Accent on solos. Those are different collections, Accent on Gillock and Accent on solos, but they are all by Gillock and they span multiple levels. I really like keeping studio copies of those on hand and letting students take them home to see how many they can learn on their own. Since they get progressively more difficult as the book wears on, it's interesting to see where they think they max out on their understanding. You know I could talk repertoire all day long, friends. But of course, my students also count pieces from their method series, their historical literature, and whatever else we find ourselves studying. Again, my students are used to working through an ever-changing variety of books because that's just how I roll over here. I'm noticing that the clock is ticking and I want to be respectful of your time, so I will close up the questions here. I did have several questions related to how I prepare my students to learn pieces independently, and that's probably a great topic for its own episode. You'll have to stay tuned for that. I have a few notes for you as we prepare to wrap up. First of all, today's show notes contain a lot of links. For more details on anything I mentioned today, just head to christinawhitlock.com/episode 236. I've linked details on my December performance challenge, my favorite Thanksgiving assignment that involves the whole family, by the way, all the music I mentioned today, and more. There's a lot there. So check out christinawhitlock.com/episode 236. Secondly, I really wanted to talk more about my students' creative twists on their challenge pieces this year, but we ran out of time. So let's do this. I am going to record some reflections on the incredible things that I've been noticing this semester by requiring that extra step, and I will post them in the Super Friends community sometime in the next week or so. Members will receive an email when those thoughts are available. We'll just count it as a little holiday bonus, okay? It's yet another reason that you should become a Super Friend for just $6. Lastly, it's almost time for Studio Teacher Thanksgiving. I've done this for several years now, and this year is no exception. So from November 17th through the 21st, anyone in my email list will receive a short video reflection from me each day, focusing on a unique point of gratitude for our work. It's always a special time, and I can't wait to share it with you again. So if you are not already on the Beyond Measure email list, you can do that again in today's show notes. Okay, I think that's it for today, friends. Let's head out of here with a toast. Studio teacher friends from all around the world, today we give thanks for the wonderful ways that ideas spread through our teacher communities. The fact that 30 and 40-piece challenges have spread all over the world thanks to the way one teacher chose to share her ideas, it's incredible. We are so fortunate to have one another, friends. I raise my glass enthusiastically to you. Hear, hear. Thanks for joining me today on this extra practical episode, my friends. I will see you next week for another episode of Beyond Measure. Onward and upward!